I told my husband I needed his support while I went back to school, but what I didn't. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I'd like to ask for a quick favor. We've noticed the channel's been losing a bit of traction, and your subscription can make all the difference. It's quick, free, and really helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world to us. Let's grow this channel together. Thank you so much. Now let's get into the video. I'm Tanya. I'm 32. And honestly, I thought I had everything figured out. You know how sometimes you get this brilliant idea and you're like, this is it. This is how I'm going to get what I want without screwing myself over. That was me last year when I told Bruce I wanted to switch from working with mothers and babies to cancer care. I mean, it wasn't completely a lie. That type of nursing does pay more, and it's more specialized. But what I didn't tell him was that I'd been thinking about leaving him for months. I just needed a way to do it without ending up broke and struggling as a single mom with 2 kids. Look, I'm not stupid. I know how divorce works. I've seen my friends get screwed over, having to move back in with their parents or work double shifts just to afford their crappy apartments. That wasn't going to be me. So when I realized I could use school as my way out, it felt like the universe was giving me a sign. I told Bruce I needed to cut back my hours at the hospital to focus on my studies, which meant he'd have to pick up more of the financial slack. And because he's always been this supportive husband type, he just said, "Of course, honey, whatever you need." It was almost too easy. The plan was simple. Let him support me through school, get my certification, land a better-paying job, then file for divorce when I was financially stable enough to handle it on my own. 2 years max, and I'd be set up for life. I even calculated it out. With the higher salary and child support, I'd actually be better off than I was married to him. The best part was how proud he seemed of me for pursuing my dreams. He started working extra hours to cover the bills I wasn't helping with anymore, taking care of the boys more when I had to study, even doing more around the house. I felt kind of bad sometimes, watching him work his tail off for what he thought was our future together. But then I'd remind myself that this was about survival, about setting myself up so I wouldn't end up like those women who stay in marriages they've outgrown just because they're scared of being broke. I deserve better than settling, you know? I deserve to be happy. And if that meant letting Bruce think we were building something together while I planned my exit strategy, well, that's just life. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was just trying to protect myself. The whole thing felt so mature and strategic. I even started putting away some of my reduced paychecks into a separate savings account. He didn't know about it. An emergency fund for when I made my move. I told myself I was being smart, not sneaky. I was thinking ahead, planning for my independence. Bruce would be fine eventually. He's a good guy. He'd find someone else who actually wanted to be married to him. Someone who didn't feel like she was suffocating every time she looked around our house and realized this was supposed to be her whole life, forever. The boys would adjust, too. Kids are resilient, everyone says so, and they'd still have their dad, probably even more than they do now since he wouldn't be working so many extra hours. When I really thought about it, my plan was actually better for everyone involved. Bruce would get to find someone who genuinely loved him, instead of someone who was just going through the motions. I get the life I actually wanted, instead of this suburban mom existence that felt like a prison sentence. And our kids would have 2 parents who were honest about what they wanted, instead of one mom who was faking happiness every single day. Between us, I was getting really good at this whole double life thing. I'd wake up every morning and put on this perfect wife act, making coffee, packing lunches, asking Bruce about his day like I actually cared about the answer. But inside my head, I was counting down the days until I could stop pretending. Every time he'd kiss me goodbye or tell me he loved me, I'd think, just keep buying it for a little longer. It sounds harsh when I say it out loud, but honestly, what was the alternative? Blow up both our lives right then and there? Make everyone miserable while I struggled through school as a Brooke single mom? No, thank you. This way was cleaner, smarter, and better for everyone in the long run. The hardest part wasn't feeling guilty about lying to Bruce. It was keeping up the act when other people were around, like when his mom would go on and on about how proud she was that I was bettering myself, and how lucky I was to have such a supportive husband. I'd smile and nod and say all the right things while internally rolling my eyes. If only she knew her precious son was basically funding my escape plan. But I got pretty good at playing the devoted wife who was just trying to advance her career. I'd post pictures on Facebook of my textbooks with captions like, "Grateful for my amazing husband who makes this possible," and watch all the likes roll in from women who probably wish their husbands were half as supportive. It felt kind of powerful, honestly, knowing I was getting all this praise for something that was actually just me being strategic about my future. The worst was when Bruce would bring up plans for after I finished school. He'd talk about maybe taking a vacation to celebrate or how we could start saving for a bigger house once I was making more money. I'd just smile and say, "That sounds great," while thinking about how I'd probably be filing papers by then. Sometimes I wondered if I should feel worse about it, but then I'd remember all the times over the years when I felt invisible in our marriage. All the times I tried to tell him I was unhappy, and he just suggested we watch a movie or go out to dinner like that would fix everything. He never really listened to what I was saying. He just assumed I was stressed about work or tired from dealing with the kids. So really, this was partly his fault for not paying attention when I tried to communicate. I started becoming friends with other women who were going through divorces or thinking about it. There was this whole group of us at the hospital who would grab drinks after our shifts and just vent about our marriages. Hearing their stories made me feel even better about my plan. Sarah from pediatrics was stuck in this awful custody battle because she left her husband without having her finances figured out first. Jessica from the emergency department was living in a studio apartment because she couldn't afford anything bigger after her divorce. I wasn't going to be another cautionary tale. I was going to be the smart one who planned ahead. Around month 6 of school, I started getting a little bolder about dropping hints about my unhappiness, just in case I needed to build a case later about how our marriage had been falling apart for a while. I'd make comments about feeling like we were growing in different directions or how I was discovering who I really was through my studies. Bruce would just hug me and say he was excited to see me finding myself, not realizing I was basically telling him I was finding myself right out of our marriage. My friend Chloe, who was the only one who knew the truth about my plan, kept telling me I was brilliant. She said, "Most women just hope things will magically get better, or they make impulsive decisions that screw them over financially. But you're being strategic, making sure you'd land on your feet." She even started calling it my liberation fund instead of my secret savings. That account made it sound even better, like I was some kind of feminist hero instead of just a wife who was planning to blindside her husband. The money was adding up nicely, too, between cutting back my hours and Bruce picking up overtime, plus the cash I was skimming from our household budget here and there. I had almost enough to cover a security deposit and first month's rent on a decent apartment by the time I'd be ready to make my move. I was actually proud of how well I was managing everything, keeping Bruce happy and supportive, maintaining my grades, building my savings, and setting myself up for independence. It felt like I was finally taking control of my life instead of just letting things happen to me. By month 8, I was getting pretty comfortable with my double life. Maybe too comfortable. I started getting sloppy about hiding my real feelings. Like when Bruce would talk about our future together, I'd just zone out instead of pretending to be interested. Or when he'd try to be affectionate, I'd find excuses to pull away because it felt fake to let him touch me when I was basically counting down the days until I could leave him. He started asking if I was okay more often, and I'd just blame it on school stress or clinical rotation being exhausting, which wasn't entirely a lie. Juggling everything was actually pretty draining, but it was working. I was getting closer to my goal every day. Then Chloe started getting weird about my plan. She'd make these comments about how maybe I should try couples therapy first, or ask if I was really sure about what I was doing. I think she was getting cold feet about being my accomplice or whatever. I reminded her that I'd tried talking to Bruce about my unhappiness before, and he never really heard me. Why should I waste more time and energy on something that was already over in my mind? Plus, couples therapy is expensive, and we couldn't afford it with me in school. See how that works? Even if I wanted to try fixing things, we couldn't because of the very situation I'd created to plan my exit. Perfect. The boys started acting up around this time too, fighting more, having trouble at school, just being difficult. Bruce kept saying it was probably because I was around less, and they were adjusting to the changes. He suggested maybe I should consider taking fewer classes so I could be more present for them. I shut that down real quick. There was no way I was extending my timeline because my kids were being dramatic. They'd be fine once everything settled into a new normal. Kids adapt faster than adults anyway. What really started getting on my nerves was how Bruce began trying harder with our relationship. Like he could sense something was off and was trying to fix it. He'd surprise me with my favorite coffee when I was studying, or take the boys out on weekends so I could have quiet time to focus on school. He even started doing more around the house without being asked. All these things that probably would have made me happy a year ago just felt annoying now because they made me feel guilty about my plan, and I didn't want to feel guilty. I wanted to feel justified. I started nitpicking everything he did wrong to remind myself why I was leaving, like how he'd load the dishwasher wrong, or how he'd fall asleep on the couch watching TV instead of coming to bed. Small stuff that never bothered me before suddenly became evidence that we weren't compatible. I kept a mental list of all his flaws and annoying habits. It made it easier to stay focused on my goal when he was being particularly sweet or supportive. The worst part was when he started talking about maybe having another baby after I finished school. He said seeing me pursue my dreams was making him fall in love with me all over again. And wouldn't it be amazing to add to our family when we were in such a good place? I actually felt sick when he said that. Not because I felt bad about deceiving him, but because it showed how completely clueless he was about what was really happening. How could he think we were in a good place when I was literally planning to divorce him? It just proved that he didn't really know me at all, which made me feel even more justified about leaving. Between us, I was getting kind of excited about the whole thing by this point. The secrecy, the planning, the countdown to freedom. It all felt like this big adventure I was on, like I was the star of my own movie about a woman taking control of her destiny. 4 months before graduation, everything went sideways in the most ridiculous way possible. Bruce came home early from work, something about his shift ending earlier than usual, while Chloe was over. We were in the kitchen having one of our usual conversations about my plan, and I guess I was being louder than I thought because I was excited about how close I was to being done with school. Chloe was asking me about my timeline, and I was explaining how I'd calculated everything out. I told her that leaving Bruce now would be stupid because I'd never be able to manage schoolwork and single parenting at the same time. But once I had my certification and landed a better job, I'd be set up perfectly. I remember saying something about how he was basically funding my independence without even knowing it, and how I just had to keep up the act until I was ready to file papers. I was actually laughing about how supportive he'd been, how he was working all this overtime to pay for his own wife to leave him. It felt so clever in that moment. Chloe was being weird about it again, asking if I ever thought about just being honest with him instead of sneaking around. I told her that honesty was a luxury I couldn't afford. Why blow up my life and struggle financially just to spare his feelings for a few extra months? The marriage was over whether he knew it or not. This way was just smarter for everyone involved. That's when I heard the front door close. Not slam, just close really quietly. And then I heard Bruce's keys hit the table in the hallway, which he only does when he's trying not to make noise. My stomach dropped because I realized he might have heard us talking. But then I told myself I was being paranoid. Even if he'd heard something, it could have been about anything. We talked about lots of stuff when Chloe came over. I went into the living room to check, and Bruce was just standing there, looking at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Not angry exactly, but not normal either. He asked where the boys were, and I told him they were at my mom's for the night. Then he asked if we could talk after Chloe left. His voice was completely flat, which should have been my first clue that something was wrong. But I just said, sure, and went back to the kitchen. Chloe left pretty quickly after that, and I could tell she was uncomfortable about something. She kept giving me these looks like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. After she was gone, I found Bruce in our bedroom just sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. I asked him what was wrong, thinking maybe he'd had a bad day at work or something. That's when he told me he'd heard our entire conversation, every word of it. For a second, I thought about denying it, but the way he was looking at me made it clear that wasn't going to work. So I tried to explain that it wasn't what it sounded like, that I was just venting about feeling overwhelmed, and Chloe had misunderstood what I was saying, but he just cut me off and said he didn't want to hear any explanations or excuses. He said the marriage was over, and he wasn't going to let me use him anymore. Just like that. No yelling, no drama, just this calm statement that completely derailed everything I'd been working toward. I started crying and telling him he was. Taking everything out of context, I was just scared about the future and saying things I didn't mean, but he wouldn't listen to any of it. He just kept saying that he finally understood who I really was, and that he was done pretending we had a future together. The next few weeks were absolutely insane. Bruce moved out of our bedroom immediately and started sleeping in the guest room. He told me he was filing for divorce and that I needed to find a lawyer. When I tried to argue with him about it, he just said he wasn't going to discuss it and walked away. It was like talking to a completely different person. The supportive, accommodating husband I'd been taking advantage of was just gone, replaced by this cold stranger who would barely look at me. What made it worse was that he wasn't being mean or vindictive about it. If he'd been angry and yelling, I could have played the victim and made him look like the bad guy. But instead, he was just completely done with me, which made me look like the villain in our story. He started handling everything through a lawyer, even though we were still living in the same house. Anytime I tried to talk to him about working things out or going to counseling, he'd just say that ship had sailed, and I should talk to his attorney if I had questions about the divorce process. The boys could tell something was wrong. Obviously, they kept asking why Daddy was sleeping in the other room and why Mommy and Daddy weren't talking to each other anymore. I tried to explain that we were just going through a rough patch, but kids aren't stupid. They knew something major was happening. Bruce was still being a good dad to them, taking them to school and helping with homework, but the family dinners and weekend activities just stopped. Everything felt awkward and tense all the time. I had to keep going to my classes and clinical rotations while dealing with all this drama at home. My grades started slipping because I couldn't concentrate on anything. All my careful planning was falling apart because Bruce had decided to blow everything up before I was ready. I kept thinking about how close I'd been to finishing school and being able to leave on my own terms. Now I was stuck in this horrible limbo where I couldn't afford to live on my own yet, but couldn't fix my marriage either. The worst part was how everyone started treating me once word got around about what was happening. Bruce must have told his family the truth about my plan because suddenly his mom wasn't calling me anymore, and his sister unfriended me on Facebook. My own family started asking uncomfortable questions about why Bruce was so determined to get divorced when he'd been so supportive of my schooling. I tried to explain that marriages just sometimes don't work out, but they could tell there was more to the story. Even some of my coworkers started acting weird around me. Apparently, Bruce had told his cousin about what happened, and she worked at the same hospital system I did. The story spread through the nursing community pretty fast. Women who used to be friendly with me suddenly seemed judgmental and distant. I felt like everyone was talking about me behind my back and deciding I was this terrible person. Chloe completely abandoned me during all this. She started saying she felt bad about encouraging my plan and that she should have talked me out of it instead of helping me scheme. Easy for her to say now that everything had blown up in my face. Some friend, right? When I needed support the most, she acted like my whole plan had been her idea in the first place. I was basically dealing with everything alone while trying to finish school and take care of two confused kids who didn't understand why. He let me have half of everything we owned, agreed to fair custody arrangements, and didn't even try to get alimony from me. His lawyer was professional but cold, and I could tell they all thought I was getting more than I deserved. I did finish nursing school and pass my certification exam, but the job market wasn't what I'd expected. The hospital positions that paid the salary I'd been counting on all had waiting lists, And I ended up taking a position that barely paid more than what I was making before. With child support and my income, I'm making it work, but just barely. The financial independence I'd planned on never materialized the way I thought it would. The boys spend half their time with Bruce now, and I hate how much they seem to prefer being at his place. He moved into a decent apartment in a better part of town and actually seems happier than he was when we were married. When they come back from his place, they talk about the fun stuff they did with Daddy and how he's teaching them to cook and play guitar. It's like he became this whole different person after I left, more engaged and energetic. Meanwhile, I'm struggling to keep up with everything on my own and feeling exhausted all the time. The worst part is seeing him at school pick up and drop off events. He's always polite but distant, like I'm just some acquaintance instead of someone he was married to for 8 years. He's lost weight, started dressing better, and honestly looks better than he has in years. A few months ago, I saw him at the boys' school carnival with some woman who was obviously more than a friend. She was pretty in this natural, understated way that made me feel overdone and try hard in comparison. The boys clearly liked her, which felt like a knife in my chest. I wanted to march over there and remind him that we'd only been divorced for a few months, but I couldn't exactly cause a scene at our kids' school. Everyone I used to be friends with from our married couple days sided with Bruce in the divorce. They invite him to gatherings and parties, but not me. I heard through someone that they all think what I did was unforgivable and that he's better off without me. It's easy for them to judge when they don't know what it was like being stuck in a marriage that felt like a dead end. My dating life has been a complete disaster. Single guys my age either want someone without kids or someone who has their life more together than I do. The few dates I've been on ended with guys ghosting me after they realized I'm a divorced single mom who's still figuring things out financially. Nobody wants to deal with that kind of baggage. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Bruce hadn't overheard that conversation with Chloe. I'd probably be finishing up my last semester right now with a solid plan in place and a better job lined up. Instead, I'm stuck in this weird in-between place where I'm not really the independent woman I wanted to be, but I can't go back to being a wife either. The whole thing just proves that men can't handle women who think strategically about their futures. Bruce should have been grateful that I was planning ahead instead of just walking out one day with no preparation. But instead, he decided to punish me for being honest about what I wanted. Now, we're both worse off than we were before, and our kids are the ones paying the price for his pride. Between us, I don't really regret what I did. I regret how it turned out, sure, but I don't regret trying to secure my future. Any woman in my position would have done the same thing if she was smart about it. I just got unlucky that he happened to come home early that day. If anything, this whole experience has taught me that you can't trust anyone to have your back except yourself. Next time, I'll be more careful about who I share my plans with.